Now Sports Central, we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the Week 9 matchup between the Florida Gators and the Georgia Bulldogs. Huge matchup for both these teams coming up here in Week 9. You got Florida, who's 4-3 on the season. This team has taken 3 losses to this point, but all 3 losses were fairly close. And so, this is still a Florida team that's got some talent. They've just taken a couple of close, tough losses, and they're taking on the top team in the country coming up here in Week 9. That is Georgia. Georgia is 7-0 heading into this matchup, and they're on track to potentially make another run for the college football playoffs. So it's a crucial game for both these teams moving forward. We'll be going over a full game preview and prediction on this match for today, starting with your team trends. Florida, they lost to LSU back a couple of weeks ago, 35-45. Both teams are coming off of byes as well. That is something to mention here. So both teams have plenty of time to prepare for this one. But yeah, Florida lost to LSU, who is a pretty good football team. LSU just dominated number 7 Ole Miss this past weekend. LSU they're a 6-2 football team, but nonetheless still a disappointing loss, as Florida is now 4-3 on the season. But as for Georgia, had no problems against Vanderbilt, beat them 55-0. So they had no problem beating them in that matchup. And Georgia, honestly, to this point, they haven't really played a tough schedule. They've played a lot of mediocre teams, kind of your bottom teams in the SEC. And otherwise, they, of course, beat Oregon back in Week 1, which was a massive win, beating them by 46. 49-3 was the final score there. And so, it really starts with this matchup for Georgia in the toughest part of the season. They got Florida this week. They got Tennessee next week. So, the most crucial part of the season starts here for Georgia, and things are only going to get tougher from here on out. So we're going to learn a lot about the Bulldogs over the next few weeks. The game's going to be on Saturday, October 29th in Jacksonville, Florida, of course, for this matchup, being the rivalry that it is. It is in a neutral location in Jacksonville. Kickoff is 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Spread's going Georgia by 22.5. So Georgia's favored by a significant margin for this one. And your over-under is 56.5. FPI is going Georgia as well, 92.8%. So, it's not a terribly big surprise seeing the Bulldogs favored as much as they are, considering you obviously got a 7-0 team here. Going up against a Florida team that is 4-3. But I do want to say, do not underestimate Florida in this matchup. I know they're 4-3 and unranked, but those 3 losses were once again pretty close losses. This team has been competitive this season, and even though they've been a bit inconsistent, I still think Florida is once again a pretty talented team. Series history, Georgia leads at 53-44. They won last year's matchup, and they've won 6 out of the past 10. This has been a pretty 50-50 series here between Georgia and Florida. Both teams have won a fair amount of games, especially in recent history. Second comparison for this one, Florida's 60th in points per game this season, 80th in points allowed. They're 104th in pass yards a game, 25th in rush yards a game. So, this is a team that you could say is stronger in the rushing game versus the passing game. That's for sure, as they're in the top 25 in rushing and in the bottom 30 there in passing. Then for yards allowed, they're 78th in passing and then 111th in rushing. So, kind of a not a terribly outstanding team here statistically in Florida, but Georgia is an outstanding team statistically. 3rd in points per game, 2nd in points allowed. They're 8th in pass yards a game, 16th in rush yards, and then for yards allowed, 8th in passing, 8th also in rushing. So, you got a team here in Georgia that is averaging 42 points a game, which is outstanding, and they're only allowing 9, which is obviously a huge standout stat there. This is a Georgia team that, even last season, this Georgia defense was brutal to play against, and kind of the same story this season. They've allowed more points this season than they did last year at this point, but there's no doubt this is still an outstanding Georgia team on both sides of the ball. Your recent match is Florida. They lost LSU 35-45, beat Missouri 24-17. Kind of a close game there. Both teams have played close games against Missouri, who is one of the worst teams in the SEC. Something interesting to keep in mind. Both teams did win, though. Florida, they beat Eastern Washington 52-17, lost to Tennessee 33-38. Tennessee is a really good football team, and Florida kept it really close against them. Tennessee just beat Alabama, and they're still undefeated at 7-0. So, that's something to keep in mind here, that's for sure. And Gators also beat South Florida 31-28. As for Georgia, beat Vanderbilt 55-0, beat Auburn 42-10. They had a close one against Missouri, 26-22. That game was very close. The Bulldogs were very much on upset alert there. Beat Kent State 39-22, kind of a sloppy performance there, and they also beat South Carolina 48-7. So, obviously you had those 2 games there between Missouri and Kent State when people started to question the Bulldogs a little bit. But since those two games, this team has been dominant, beating Auburn and Vanderbilt by significant margins. Key points for this one, Florida 4-3. They've shown promise once again. This is an inconsistent football team. They've had a few high points in the season where they've played really well. I mean, if you look back to that Utah game back in week 1, that was an incredible performance there for the Gators. And I mean, since then we really haven't seen an outstanding performance. I mean, they played really well against Tennessee, gave them a fight. And I mean, they played well against Kentucky, ended up taking a loss there. I mean, they've had a couple of close games against mediocre opponents in South Florida and Missouri. But otherwise, I mean, this team has been fairly competitive in every game that they've played. So, I mean, for Florida here, they got to force turnovers. That's no question here, and keep it close. I mean, you're playing Georgia, who is the top-ranked team in the country for a reason. They're an outstanding team on both sides of the ball. And so for Florida, got to take advantage and get some turnovers in this game if you want a chance, and obviously keeping it close from the start. I mean, if you get down by 2 touchdowns plus, maybe 17 points, it's going to be really tough to come back, especially going up against a Georgia team that is dominant, to say the least. So for the Bulldogs, they're strong on both sides of the ball, not just in one area. And the most important of the season really starts here for Georgia once again. The schedule only gets tougher from here on out for Georgia. The next few weeks are going to be crucial for this team, and we're going to learn a lot about who the Bulldogs really are. I mean, obviously they got that huge game coming up against Tennessee next week. We're already looking forward to that one, as that's going to be, that's going to be the game of the year since Tennessee played Alabama. And yes, I mean, all around, Georgia, a very talented team, and this is a chance to prove that. So that let's get the prediction here for Florida and Georgia coming up here in Week 9, and I'm going to go with Georgia. No surprise here, 38-17 is my predicted final score. The more intriguing thing is predicting who's going to cover the spread here. It's currently 22.5 points towards Georgia, and I do have Florida covering this spread. I mean, once again, Florida's been competitive all season in every single game. So they've had some close games against teams that they maybe shouldn't have been close, but at the same time, I mean, in all 3 of their losses, they kept it within 10 points. So I do think Florida keeps it pretty competitive for a long time. I think Georgia pulls away in the second half and ends up winning this one 38-17. And I'm confident Georgia wins this one. I'm going to say 70%. It would be a massive upset, though, if Florida could knock off Bulldogs here. And honestly, I'm not ruling that out. I think that Florida does have a chance to potentially give Georgia a fight here. And I do have, once again, Florida to cover the spread and keep this game fairly close, even though I think Georgia, once again, in the end, will pull away in the second half. Your over-under is 56.5. I'll take the under for this one. And once again, Florida to cover the spread. But anyway, that said, it's going to wrap it up for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this matchup, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more. From Ball Sports Central, catch you on the next one.